Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm going to speak from the podium. I had these grand visions of having a little microphone like this and delivering a really skillful TED Talk, as my two compatriots have just done. But we have been absolutely inundated by COVID-19 instructions in the last 2 weeks, and so I'm going to read from my notes. Please excuse me. My name's Wynne Lawrence. I'm a Canadian and a Londoner. I studied international relations at the University of Toronto, and then I did a master's in human rights at the London School of Economics. I trained with the firm that I still work for now as senior associate, Clyde & Co. I'm going to tell you about climate risk in business, but first I want to tell you a little bit about what it's like for me at parties. So usually at parties, you'll exchange a few pleasantries. In a coronavirus situation, you might wave at someone and then have a chat at a meter's distance. And as part of that conversation, they might ask, what do you do? I work in the law. I'm a lawyer. The next question, inevitably, if the person is still then talking to you, is what kind of law? When I say that I'm an insurance and reinsurance litigator, I often see them scanning the room a little bit, sadly, maybe looking for the nearest accountant they might want to talk to. But being an insurance lawyer and working in the insurance industry is a really exciting place to work and is hugely intellectually stimulating. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that is. I suppose when most people think about insurance, they think about a man with a hat and his briefcase going door to door, the salesman. Or maybe the character at the beginning of Groundhog Day who accosts Bill Murray every day over and over and over again, asking him to buy insurance. But I really do think insurance has an image problem or needs a rebrand, because what insurance is about understanding, mitigating, managing, transferring, and trading risk. And there is, in my opinion, very little that is more relevant to the world that we live in today, which is a globalized one. Working in the insurance industry means working with people who are at the forefront of thinking about how to manage and mitigate the world's biggest risks. And it also means working in an industry that enables global investment and trade, development, travel, work, and human creativity. Insurance also provides an important safety net to individuals, to communities, to businesses, and to countries. It helps communities to bounce back from disaster and loss, to rebuild and to recover after hurricane or drought or earthquake or tsunami. It's an integral gearbox for resilience in our societies. The trade in risk and the sharing of risk is one of the world's great inventions, and in some form it exists very far back in history and in every society. So the earliest forms of distribution of risk in monetary economies was by Chinese and Babylonian traders as far back as 3000 BC. In ancient Greece and Rome, there were benevolent societies that clubbed together to assist members with benefit payments for funeral expenses when those members were deceased and payments to their families. And property insurance, as we know it today, dates back to the Great Fire of London. Insurance remains relevant to the risks of today: cyber risk, political risk, trade risk, pandemic risk. And as I mentioned, I've spent a large part of today working on COVID-19 cases. But most importantly, both today, every day, and into the future, we need to be thinking about climate risk. The insurance industry has been at the forefront and the sharp end of the increasing incidence of extreme weather, and has long acknowledged that climate change and the importance of action to mitigate its very worst effects. Tools and know-how have been developed and are being developed in the insurance industry to model and map both the changes in weather and the increasing exposures that we have as a society and as businesses. Insurance actually has a vital role to play in increasing global resilience and enabling our societies to thrive, to help us understand climate risk and to adapt to an already changing climate. For example, there are innovative insurance products that are being developed that will respond not to drought, but to its harbingers, such as lack of rainfall. And that would allow humanitarian funding to flow to at-risk regions before that lack of rainfall becomes drought, becomes hunger, becomes migration, becomes conflict. As a founding member of my firm Clyde & Co.'s Resilience Initiative, I've spent the last years looking in depth at how to bridge the protection gap and the ways in which insurance can help foster our collective resilience to natural disasters. Climate change poses an existential threat to our societies, to our communities, and to the global financial system. Although government action has been slow, the pace is increasing, and the Paris Agreement, signed in 2015 by 185 countries, is very cleverly designed in that it includes within it a ratchet mechanism which enables ambition to increase over time. This year's COP26 in Glasgow, which the UK is hosting in partnership with Italy, will be an important step. I think we all know of the urgency of the transition to a low-carbon economy, but it requires no less than a fundamental rewiring of the world economy as it is. And it's important the transition is managed carefully in order to avoid what the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney called a climate Minsky moment, or a sudden drop in asset values that could send shockwaves through the entire global economy. The business community has a really important role to play in this, and many leading companies have already declared net zero targets. More are increasing their ambition as net zero targets and the dates for which they are proposed are being shortened all the time and trying to match one another's ambition, which is a really positive sign. It's also no coincidence that Mark Carney gave a seminal speech called The Tragedy of the Horizon that I really recommend that you all read at the Lloyd's Market in London in 2015. That's the heart of the world's insurance markets. He outlined the three risks that face business and the financial system. Physical risks, so that's the slow onset climatic changes that will change weather patterns and change the incidence of extreme heat or extreme cold, change the way that we operate, and change the way that our businesses will need to be run. Of course, acute changes to the climate system, those physical risks like extreme rainfall or hurricane, flood or drought. Then transition risks, and those are the risks of being left behind or having assets devalued if you don't keep up with the transition to a low-carbon economy. And finally, liability risks. That's the risk that companies or governments face, being held liable in the courts for their failure to adapt to a changing climate or to mitigate their emissions. At Clyde & Co., I've been part of a cross-disciplinary team looking at how climate risks will affect all of our core areas: shipping, trade and commodities, insurance, aviation, construction and projects, energy. Since Mark Carney's speech to Lloyd's 5 years ago, we've been thinking about climate risks to business and also the opportunities that could come as a result of the transition to a low-carbon economy. And we've been speaking regularly to our clients and others in the city and beyond about climate risk. Our team started out very small and based in the insurance departments, but it has expanded throughout the firm and our practice areas. And we now have participation from associates and partners in our offices in Australia, the Middle East, the United States, Canada, Latin America. We've published a number of papers on the topic, and we have a dedicated resilience hub that I'd encourage you to take a look at that has videos and other materials looking at climate risk from different angles and from a business perspective. The largest and most detailed paper was on climate liability risk that I edited last year, and that traces the different types of litigation that are emerging in jurisdictions around the world and the risks to companies, directors, and officers that may come about because of a failure to adapt or to mitigate. It was published during last year's London Climate Action Week, at which time we hosted a conference in the middle of the City of London, just beside the Lloyd's building, in fact, and had 280 business leaders attend. We're actually going to be holding our second conference as part of the second annual London Climate Action Week, which is in late June, early July. And I'd encourage you all to look around for what's going to be going on, because there'll be participation from the arts, from business, and from legal profession as well, and lots of events throughout the week. As part of the week, we're also going to be hosting a legal hackathon as part of our contribution to what's called the Chancery Lane Project. Again, that's a really interesting initiative that brings together lawyers both in-house and in private practice to workshop and brainstorm what climate-relevant clauses in contracts look like and what climate-relevant model laws might look like as well in the future. There needs to be a real structural change in how we actually understand and manage our contractual relationships and our relationships to the environment. And so having lawyers working on the actual tools and words around how to make that happen is a really important initiative that I'd encourage you to follow carefully. So now, when I go to parties, I do still and very proudly say I'm an insurance lawyer, but I do also talk about my work on climate risk and resilience. I'm very honored to be considered a pioneer in this and to be included amongst my fellow presenters today. But as my colleagues at Clyde & Co. and in other firms and in other parts of industry and in the economy will know, working on climate risk is not a siloed endeavor. We might have been leading in our work on this, but it is my sincere hope that many are all also now taking the initiative to understand that climate risk is a business risk and to play a part in helping our business communities and the financial system prepare for the physical transition and liability risks of a changing climate, for the growing international consensus and national policy action that will come inevitably, and also because of the necessary orderly transition that we all need to make away from a fossil fuel-based economy. Thank you very much.